Greetings and welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. We are looking at Unit 4 of the American Revolution, and this will be half of Section 5 and all of Section 6. And in these two sections, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at two very important documents that are going to lead us to the American Revolution or to independence in the Revolution. And in the Section 6, the second section, we're going to look at kind of how the Americans and the British stack up against each other as far as their strengths and their weaknesses. And so that's what we're going to be looking at in these two sections. And so here in this second half of Section 5, we're looking at foundation documents of American independence. And really it starts with Common Sense, which is the title of a pamphlet or a booklet, if you will, written by Thomas Paine. Now, Paine was an Englishman. He had come from England, and he was very much into this revolutionary spirit. He really thought that the Americans were on the right track as far as demanding their rights, but he wanted them to go a bit further. And like I just mentioned, so far in the Revolution, the Americans have only been demanding their rights as Englishmen. No one had really mentioned the word independence publicly. Paine is going to change that. In January of 1776, he is going to publish his booklet, Common Sense. And he becomes the first to publicly call for American independence from England. He used very plain language. He was very persuasive. He was widely read. So it's not just the wealthy who read them. It's not just the commoners who read him. It was everybody, including those in between. And in a nutshell, he made two arguments. Basically, why would the tiny island of Britain control an entire continent, that is America? He said that doesn't make sense. Why are we letting this one tiny island control this entire continent, or half of the continent at the time? And the other thing he argued was he questioned the right of the king to rule. And his basic argument was, what right does he have? What makes him different or more special than the rest of us? And he really calls that into question. And the title, Common Sense, kind of applies to both of those questions. It's just not common sense, he argued. And so this really began to push Americans and persuade Americans to start thinking and declaring independence. So Common Sense was our first document. Our second document is, of course, going to be the Declaration of Independence itself. Here we are in 1776. Now, remember, Lexington and Concord were April of 1775. Bunker Hill was a few months later. So there's already been actual conflict, battle, but we've not declared independence yet. That's not happened. Well, here we are, and it's June of 1775. And the Second Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia. The Virginia delegate, Richard Henry Lee, introduces a bill, a resolution, for Congress to declare America free of British rule. That's a big step. That's a huge step. And in fact, most weren't quite ready for that step yet. Even though all these men have read Common Sense, many may agree with it, they're not ready to take that actual step yet. And that's going to be big. So there's a lot of debate between the delegates at the Continental Congress. Some were very much for it. For example, the delegates from Massachusetts, where most of the hotbed of revolution had been so far. A lot of the Virginians were for independence. Some of the others, not so much. They didn't see the advantage that they would have by declaring independence. So there's a lot of back and forth debate. There is no clear-cut answer. And eventually they agree that they are going to wait 1 month and revisit this idea of independence. And during that month, they're going to do a couple of things. First of all, the delegates are going to write to their home state government. So the Massachusetts delegates, for example, are going to write home to the Massachusetts state government. And they're going to ask, What do you want us to do? Do you want us to declare our independence, or do you wish us to declare that we are still loyal to the king? What do we do? And so that was the first thing. The second thing they're going to do while they're in the middle of this 1 month, vacation from this idea, is they're going to go ahead and write a preliminary statement, an early draft of what our independence should look like. And so we have a couple of things. We got, do we want to do this? And if we are, what's it going to sound like when we do vote for independence? They wanted that draft ready, so if they did declare, they could move forward quickly and go ahead and declare that independence. So that was on June 6th. The debate lasted a couple of days. They took a month off, or at that point, they wanted to take a full month. And during that month, like I said, they're going to draft a statement of independence. And they're going to appoint what they call the Committee of Five. And you guessed it, there are 5 members of this committee. Now, only 3 are shown in this image, but they're the 3 probably most widely known members. We have, of course, John Adams. He's kind of the ringleader of this Committee of Five. He wanted them to get together while they're taking that month off. He is going to put together this committee. So he has Benjamin Franklin, most well-known man in all the colonies, a guy by the name of Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman. And he also asks a very young Thomas Jefferson, a delegate from Virginia, to join him. Adams had his eye on Jefferson for some time as a very bright man who was very up and coming, had a lot of big political ideas. And so Adams, Franklin, Livingston, Sherman, Jefferson are the Committee of Five. And I always say this kind of tongue in cheek, but you all know how group work operates. You all get in a group, and eventually one person kind of winds up doing all the work, whether they want to or they were kind of the one left to do it. It's kind of what happened here with the Committee of Five. In fact, Adams pushes Jefferson to actually be the writer, to do all the real hard drafting of this statement of independence. So Jefferson takes about 2 weeks, writes a draft, actually several drafts, of what he thinks the Declaration of Independence should be. He takes a finished copy, he gives it to Franklin and to Adams first. They make some changes, especially about slavery, and some minor wording here and there, but nothing major. And then finally, Livingston and Sherman come in and they kind of rubber stamp it and say, yep, that's good to go. And the idea is after the vote to see who wins, should we declare independence or not, in the first part of July 1776, they will present this image or this document as a declaration of our independence. And so that's exactly what happened. We take the vote, and you kind of know the rest. Now, there are a couple of pieces to the Declaration of Independence that are actually pretty important for us. There are 5 parts. Now, I don't care that you know all 5 parts, but what I do care about is you know a couple of the phrases. First of all, the introduction. Why is this Declaration of Independence being written? And what you see on the screen right now is the wording of the first part of the Declaration of Independence. And basically, to summarize it in our speech today very, very quickly, it basically says throughout time, when one group has to break away from another group and become an equal government, it's necessary for us to declare what we're doing and why. Okay, that's all it means. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary. That's what that means. The second part says these are the ideals of which we want to form our new government. This is our ideas on which we're committed to. This is actually a really important piece. In this piece, Jefferson writes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government. Okay, let's put that in plain terms and then a little bit of explanation here. We believe in these ideas. First of all men are created equal. Now, in reality, it probably should read all white men are created equal. Certainly, the founding fathers believed in this whole idea of equality, but it was equality for them, not for women, not for African Americans, not for Native American Indians. It was for white males. And they are endowed by their Creator with certain undeniable rights. And these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these are the three big rights according to Jefferson's independence statement. And these rights are protected by a government that gets their power from the people. And if a government doesn't protect these rights, the people have the right to get rid of that government and start another one. That's all that means. Now, I want to direct your attention to a couple key pieces. These rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish the government and to institute a new government. Hopefully, you're thinking this sounds kind of familiar. That's my hope. It should sound familiar to you because if you remember back to our Unit 3, we talked about the Enlightenment and the ideas of John Locke. Remember John Locke? He said that men are entitled to three basic rights: life, liberty, and property. So Jefferson didn't plagiarize word for word here, but it's the same basic idea. And Locke went on to say that if government didn't protect those rights, the people can abolish the government, get rid of that government, and form a government that can. So I often say, while these are our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Franklin, and the rest, John Locke is kind of like the godfather of American independence because he plants these ideas in the minds of the men who founded the United States. And so Jefferson has definitely read Locke. The other founding fathers have read Locke. They know that this is a very Lockean idea. And so that's really pretty important right here. The rest of the Declaration is pretty so-so. It's complaints against the king. This is what we have trouble with the king, he said. And the fourth part is these are the efforts we've gone through to not break up. And finally, the fifth is the actual Declaration of Independence, the actual statement that says America is free. And you see that there in red, and all political connections between the United 13 colonies and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So they take the vote. It winds up being 12 votes for independence, none against, and one colony, New York, abstained, which meant they cast no vote. And if you'd like to see that, there is a clip from the movie John Adams. I really highly recommend you watch this clip. It's not so much the actual vote, it's what their expressions and their reactions to the vote are at the end. Because essentially these guys are committing themselves to treason. They are going against their king. They're going against their government. They are now officially traitors to the British crown. And I think most of you probably know the punishment that a traitor gets, and that is the death penalty. And this is a very momentous decision. I would imagine that most of you think they take this vote and they're probably celebrating. It's probably a big deal. And it is, but they're not celebrating. They're realizing how important of a decision they just made. That's kind of cool. We're going to go ahead and skip that video. I really encourage you to check it out on your time. This Google slideshow is on Canvas, so you can go ahead and look that up. And now we're going to move into Section 6, comparisons between the British and the Americans. And I'm going to do this very, very quickly and just kind of hit a couple of really important pieces. And before we look at that, you also need to understand that America is divided. America is very divided. 3 groups in America. The Patriots, the group who want independence. They want to be free of British rule. The Loyalists, those who want to remain loyal to the king. And the neutrals, those who just don't care. They're kind of in the middle. And you can see the Patriots and the Loyalists, neither one have a numerical advantage. They're actually in a minority. And that's what all this basically says. I do want to mention that the Loyalists, imagine being someone loyal to the king, loyal to Britain during the Revolution. And I don't think this is a spoiler because I think most of you already know the Americans win. Britain loses the Revolution. I know, big surprise, right? So what about those loyalists who live in the American states? What about them? Do you think they can go about their lives as usual? And the answer is probably not. No one's going to trust them. Their lands are going to be taken. Their homes may be burned. These were people who, during the Revolution, are actually the enemies of the Patriots and the neutrals. And so the Loyalists, about 80,000 of them, are actually going to leave the country at the end of the war. Many are going to go back to England. Some are going to go to Canada. Some are going to go to English colonies in the Caribbean. But they are going to get out. They're going to face a lot of persecution, and they have to leave. All right, so some British strengths and weaknesses. And it looks like a lot here. And I'm going to move my head over so that we can kind of see a little bit better. But I'm going to try to anyway. Put me over here. So, first of all, population is a strength of the British. They have 7.5 million people compared to 2.5 million people in the colonies. What this means is they can recruit more men for their army. And in fact, look at number 3. They have a professional, strong army. And those are the key words, professional. This is what they do for a job. This is not a civilian, an everyday average person who's choosing to fight. These are professional, full-time soldiers. Next up, Britain has the best Navy in the world compared to the American Navy that doesn't exist. So they don't even have a Navy, the Americans. So already you can see where that's going to be a major advantage. Britain has worldwide trade, an established monetary system. They have allies, whether it's the German Hessians or the Native Americans that the British have talked into helping them fight the colonists who are settling on their land. Or maybe it's the loyalists who are joining the British Army. About 50,000 of those loyalists are going to fight in the war at any given time. So they have lots of strengths, and most of that is numerical as far as the number of troops that they can put into the combat situations, but also don't sneeze at the world trade. That's going to give them a superior advantage as well. But their weaknesses are pretty important too. First of all, they're 3,000 miles from home. So if a British general wants to launch a new attack and he needs fresh troops and supplies, he's got to write a letter and send it across the Atlantic. It takes about 45 days at this point. So the War Department has to look at it, argue about it, and then Parliament has to authorize it. Now, you know government doesn't work that fast. So let's factor another 45 days. We're at 3 months. Let's figure another 45 days to get all the troops and supplies together. And then another 45 days to ship them back across the Atlantic. We're looking at a half of a year before that general can really put into place what his plans have been for months. So this is not a real advantage at all to be this far away from their home base, so to speak. Speaking of those British generals, they're kind of like the B team Okay, they're not the best. They're good, but they are not the best that we could put on the field. These British generals are the ones who they may have disgraced themselves at some point. They may not just quite be as brilliant as the other guys. And they've been sent to America to kind of take care of the American problem. The A team, or the best generals, are worried about what's going on in Europe. That's their job. And because you have all these guys who are maybe not quite the best, there is no clear plan. It's a very confused system of what the plans for war has to be. And finally, I have on here, Britain has to win the war outright. You have to win the war. You have to station troops at every village and town and city to keep the peace. And America is just too big for that. All America has to do is just wear out the British and make them tired of fighting. So keep that in mind. So now let's look at the American strengths and weaknesses. First of all, the Americans do have great leadership. Washington is going to be undisputedly an inspiring military commander. Adams and Franklin and many others are going to do a great job politically. And especially where Franklin and Adams shine is they convince France to join the war against England. Now you have to remember, France and England have hated each other for centuries. So America's kind of playing that. They're going to France and saying, hey, we're fighting your oldest enemy. Why don't you help us? Now, France had some ideas of their own why they were fighting, but the point of the matter is they joined. They gave America money, weapons, clothing, supplies, a French Navy. Remember how important that Navy is going to be. And they even sent military troops to help fight the British in America. So, guys, without the aid of the French, America really didn't stand a chance. America's agriculturally self-sufficient. We can grow our own food, and that's going to be an advantage. We're not 3,000 miles away from our supply base. And America has to maintain the war. They don't have to win every battle. They just have to keep surviving. And I often say it's kind of like a game of football. If your team plays perfect defense during the game, the other team cannot win. They can't score. And likewise, if you play perfect defense, you can win because theoretically you could get an interception or a turnover and run it back for a touchdown. You score. And so you think of America as a defense in a football game. They just have to keep holding in there. They don't have to win every drive, but they have to just maintain and block the British from getting too far. That's really the important piece. Now, America has some weaknesses. First of all, they lack unity. There's a lot of jealousy between the colonies. Big colonies like Virginia and Massachusetts are going to be mistrusted by the smaller colonies like Rhode Island or Connecticut. They're just not going to quite trust these large colonies. And America is divided between these patriots and loyalists and neutrals. And, and that's within a village or a town. They could even be divided. There's very little real money. This is going to be a problem. The Continental Congress is going to issue paper money. And most people aren't going to trust that paper money. They're going to see it as being worthless. Gunpowder, firearms are going to be scarce until the French can bring in enough that, the American army is well provided for. So here we've really looked at the strengths and the weaknesses of both sides. I really think you need to think about, if you look at it just on paper or on the screen, if you will, who should have won this war? Who had the strengths and the weaknesses to really survive and be successful in this war? And I think if we're pretty honest, it should probably be the British. So what happens is the Americans are the true underdogs here. And we're going to look at the big battles, the significant battles coming up in our next few sections. So I urge you to stay tuned to that. And if you have questions, as always, I encourage you to send those to me, and I'll help you out as much as I can. So until next time, thank you.